Before he died, this man sent a letter about P. Diddy. It changed everything. The manila envelope sat on Detective Sarah Reeves's desk for 3 days before she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, 16 pages of desperate scrawl from a man who knew he was dying. "When you read this, I'll be gone," it began. "But what I know about Sean Combs can't die with me." Those words would launch an investigation that would shake the entertainment industry to its core. Marcus Wilson had been a sound engineer for over 20 years, working with the biggest names in hip-hop and R&B. His reputation for discretion and technical brilliance made him a sought-after collaborator in an industry where secrets were currency. But in July 2023, when doctors gave him 6 months to live, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, something inside Marcus shifted. The weight of what he had witnessed, what he had chosen to ignore, suddenly felt unbearable. "I remember the day the package arrived," Detective Reeves would later tell reporters, her voice steady but her eyes revealing the emotional toll the case had taken. It was postmarked 3 days before Marcus Wilson's death. The handwriting was shaky but determined, the words of someone racing against time to unburden their conscience. The letter detailed encounters spanning nearly 15 years, private parties at Combs' homes in the Hamptons, Los Angeles, and Miami, where Marcus had been hired to set up sound systems and sometimes record sessions. What began as professional assignments gradually exposed him to a darker side of the music mogul's empire. "I told myself it wasn't my business," Marcus wrote, his penmanship deteriorating as the pages progressed. "But when you're dying, you see things differently. The young artists, the NDAs, the threats, I can't take this knowledge to my grave." 23 years earlier, Marcus Wilson had been a promising young engineer fresh out of audio engineering school in Atlanta. His big break came when a friend recommended him for a last-minute session at a local studio where a rising producer needed technical assistance. "That night changed my life," Marcus had written in his journal, which his widow shared with investigators. "Working with Sean was like nothing I'd experienced. His vision, his drive, it was intoxicating to be near that kind of ambition." The dimly lit control room of Criterion Studios became Marcus's introduction to the inner circle. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the electricity of creativity. Diddy, then still primarily known as Puff, had paced behind him, hand, occasionally resting on Marcus's shoulder as he made minute adjustments to vocal tracks. "More presence, more power. Make it sound like money," Diddy had instructed and Marcus had delivered. By the 3rd day of sessions, Diddy had offered him a spot on his technical team. "You understand the sound in my head before I explain it?" he told Marcus. "That's rare. I need people like you around me." The friendship that developed was genuine, at least initially. In his letter, Marcus described late nights discussing musical influences, equipment innovations, and industry politics. Diddy had been generous, sending Marcus's mother flowers when she was hospitalized and paying for his sister's college textbooks when finances were tight. "That's what makes this so hard," Marcus wrote. "He wasn't just my employer, he became family. But what I witnessed over time, no family should protect these kinds of secrets." The letter detailed the gradual shift. Marcus observed beginning around 2008. Private parties became more exclusive, more secretive. Guest lists were closely guarded, security protocols intensified. "The first time I felt truly uncomfortable was at the Miami house," Marcus wrote. "I was setting up audio in the pool house when 2 security guards escorted me out, saying the ER area was now restricted. Later that night I saw young artists, some barely established in the industry, being escorted into that same pool house. When they emerged hours later, they weren't the same people. Something in their eyes had changed." Marcus described installing recording equipment in multiple rooms at Diddy's properties, some visible, others hidden at explicit request. Initially told they were for creative spontaneity, he later questioned their true purpose. "I installed the system in the cabana myself," he wrote. 3 pinhole microphones, voice-activated. "When I asked why we needed recording capabilities there, Sean just put his arm around my shoulder and said, 'Insurance, my brother. In this industry, you always need insurance.'" A particularly haunting section of the letter described a December night in 2011 at the Manhattan apartment. Marcus had arrived early to troubleshoot some equipment issues before a listening party. "I heard shouting from the master bedroom," Marcus wrote, "then something crashing against the wall. When Sean emerged 20 minutes later, he was perfectly composed, but there was a young artist behind him, someone who'd just signed to the label, with a split lip and eyes that wouldn't meet mine. Sean just nodded at me and said, 'Technical difficulties, right, Marcus?' It wasn't a question." For years, Marcus had compartmentalized these experiences, focusing instead on the professional opportunities and financial security his association with Diddy provided. His wife had noticed the toll it was taking: nightmares, increased drinking, sudden mood shifts. "My husband would wake up in cold sweats," Elaine Wilson told Detective Reeves during their third interview. "He'd go days without speaking after returning from certain trips. When I pushed him to talk about it, he'd just say, 'The less you know, the better, Laney. Some things you can't unhear.'" The breaking point came in early 2023, at what would be Marcus's final job for Diddy. A private gathering at the East Hampton estate had been positioned as a creative retreat for select artists and industry executives. Marcus had been setting up microphones in the main studio when he overheard a conversation between Diddy and his head of security about handling a situation with an artist who was making noise about events from a party the previous year. The way they talked about this person, like they were disposing of a problem, not addressing a human being's concerns, it chilled me, Marcus wrote. When Sean noticed me, he didn't miss a beat. He switched to talking about speaker placement, but his eyes told me he knew exactly what I'd heard. That night, Marcus had collected his equipment and driven straight home to New Jersey, instead of staying for the weekend as planned. He never accepted another job from Diddy or his companies. Again, I told him I had health issues, Marcus explained in the letter. It wasn't a lie. The stress was killing me long before the cancer, but the real disease was the guilt, knowing what I knew and saying nothing. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Marcus's testimony was his description of the elaborate system designed to maintain silence. Non-disclosure agreements were standard, but they represented only the official layer of protection. It was the unspoken threats that really kept people in line, Marcus wrote. The casual mentions of careers being made or broken, the reminders of how much Sean had done for you, how much your family had benefited from your association with him, the hints about how other disloyal people had suddenly found themselves unable to get work anywhere in the industry. Marcus detailed a network of enablers, security personnel, attorneys, assistants, and fellow artists, who either actively participated in maintaining secrecy or looked the other way. His letter named 27 individuals who he claimed had direct knowledge of inappropriate or potentially illegal activities. What haunts me most is my own complicity, Marcus confessed. I told myself I was just the tech guy, that what happened after I set up the equipment wasn't my responsibility. But when you wire a house for sound, knowing how those recordings might be used against vulnerable people, you're part of the machine. The letter included specific dates, locations, and witnesses. To incidents spanning nearly 2 decades, Marcus had methodically documented patterns of behavior that, viewed collectively, painted a disturbing picture of power abused and trust betrayed. When Detective Reeves finished reading the letter, she sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes. A 17-year veteran of the Special Victims Unit, she had investigated hundreds of cases involving powerful men. But the scope and detail of Marcus Wilson's testimony was extraordinary. What made Wilson's account compelling wasn't just the specific incidents he described, Reeves later explained to the grand jury. It was the context he provided, the gradual evolution of behavior over time, the consistent patterns across different locations and years, and most importantly, his willingness to implicate himself as someone who had enabled these situations through his silence. The investigation began quietly. Reeves and her partner, Detective James Morales, first verified Marcus Wilson's identity and professional history. They confirmed his employment record, his reputation in the industry, and the timing of his terminal diagnosis. We needed to establish whether this was a deathbed confession or possibly a fabrication, motivated by grudges or financial incentives, Morales explained. The fact that Wilson made no demands, sought no publicity, and had continued working with Combs for years, despite witnessing troubling behavior, lent credibility to his account. Next came the painstaking process of corroborating specific incidents described in the letter: security footage from hotels, credit card records confirming presence at locations on specific dates, and most crucially, interviews with others who had been present. The most difficult part was getting people to talk, Reeves recalled. The fear was palpable. These weren't just people worried about violating NDAs, they were terrified of more personal consequences. The breakthrough came 6 weeks into the investigation, when a former assistant agreed to speak after being granted immunity. Her testimony corroborated key elements of Marcus's account and added disturbing new details. After that first witness came forward, it was like a dam breaking, Morales said. People who had been carrying these secrets for years suddenly had permission to unburden themselves. 4 months after receiving Marcus Wilson's letter, Detectives Reeves and Morales arrived at Diddy's Manhattan office with a search warrant. The mogul's initial reaction had been calm, almost amused. "This is what we're doing now? Taking the word of a dead man with an axe to grind?" he had asked, leaning back in his leather chair. The city skyline spread out behind him like a kingdom. But the confidence had faltered when Reeves began reciting specific dates and incidents, information that had been corroborated by multiple sources. The color had drained from his face when she mentioned the recording systems in the Hamptons house. "You've been led down a rabbit hole of lies," his attorney had interjected, ending the interview. "My client has been a fixture in entertainment for decades. Success breeds jealousy and false accusations." As they left the building, Reeves had turned to Morales. "Did you see his face when I mentioned the pool house recordings? He thought those files were gone." The case against Sean Combs would not be quick or simple. The power dynamics of the music industry, the years that had passed since some of the alleged incidents, and the resources available to the defense created significant challenges. 3 of the victims named in Marcus's letter initially refused to cooperate with investigators. 2 eventually came forward after learning about the scope of evidence already gathered. 1 maintained his silence, too afraid of industry repercussions. "This isn't just about one man's actions," a former artist who agreed to testify told the grand jury. "It's about an entire system that protects certain people and silences victims. Coming forward means acknowledging you've been violated twice. First, by the abuse itself, and then by an industry that treats you as disposable." The district attorney's office proceeded carefully, building a case that could withstand the inevitable legal challenges. 8 months after receiving Marcus Wilson's letter, they presented evidence to a grand jury. The indictment, when it came, included charges spanning more than a decade of alleged abuses. Marcus Wilson did not live to see the impact of his final act of courage. He died 3 days after mailing his letter, surrounded by his family who had no knowledge of what he had done. "He seemed at peace those last days," his widow later recalled. "He told me he had finished his most important work. I thought he meant the restoration of those vintage mixing boards he loved so much. I had no idea he was talking about justice." The investigation continues to expand, with authorities in 3 states now examining additional allegations that have emerged since the initial charges were filed. The entertainment industry has been forced into uncomfortable conversations about power, complicity, and the systems that have allowed abuse to go unchecked for decades. For Detective Reeves, the case represents both a professional milestone and a personal evolution. Marcus Wilson could have taken what he knew to his grave, she reflected. He chose instead to bear witness, even knowing he wouldn't be here to face the consequences or see justice served. That kind of moral courage is rare. The manila envelope that started it all now sits in an evidence locker, its contents having altered countless lives. The shaky handwriting on its final page reads, "I was silent for too long. May this letter speak for those who still can't find their voice." In the aftermath of the initial charges, 5 more individuals have come forward with their own accounts. Industry practices around private parties, NDAs, and artist management have come under increased scrutiny. A reckoning long delayed has finally begun. Marcus gave his life to music, his wife said at a press conference after the indictment was announced. But his greatest contribution wasn't the perfect sound he created in the studio. It was the truth he finally allowed to be heard. If this story shocked you, subscribe because the next one is even more incredible.